Deep beneath the sands of Egypt, archaeologists made a discovery that would challenge everything they thought they knew about early Christianity. What they found in that sealed tomb defied explanation and left even the most skeptical scientists questioning the boundaries between faith and science. A miracle that had been waiting in darkness for over 16 centuries was about to see light again. But before we continue, leave a comment saying where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I'd love to see how far these extraordinary discoveries are reaching across the world. Dr. Elena Martinez had spent her entire career digging through ancient civilizations. 23 years of scorching desert heat, endless paperwork, and funding battles that never seemed to end. At 47, she was considered one of the leading experts in Coptic archaeology, the kind of scholar universities fought to recruit. Her hands had uncovered pottery shards that rewrote history books. Her eyes had been the first in millennia to see treasures that museums would kill for. But Elena had never been a woman of faith. Science was her religion. Evidence was her scripture. If something couldn't be measured, cataloged, and peer-reviewed, it simply didn't exist in her world. She had grown up Catholic, attended Mass every Sunday until she turned 18, but university had stripped away those childhood certainties one lecture at a time. Now she viewed religious artifacts as historical curiosities, nothing more. The excavation site was located 60 kilometers south of Cairo, in a region that had yielded several significant Christian finds over the past decade. Elena's team had been working there for 8 months, methodically uncovering what appeared to be a 4th century monastery complex. The work was painstaking, tedious, the kind that required infinite patience and attention to detail that would drive most people insane. It was Dr. James Morrison who first noticed the anomaly. Morrison was Elena's senior field archaeologist, a quiet Scotsman who had worked more digs than he could count. He had an eye for spotting things others missed, patterns in the soil that revealed secrets buried for centuries. Elena, Morrison called from the eastern section of the dig site. His voice carried that particular tone archaeologists knew well, the sound of someone who had found something significant. "You need to see this." Elena wiped the sweat from her forehead and walked over to where Morrison was crouched beside a section of exposed stone. The desert sun was brutal that September morning, but she barely noticed the heat anymore. "What is it, James?" Morrison pointed to a series of carefully cut limestone blocks arranged in a perfect rectangle. The stones were different from the rest of the monastery ruins. Older, more precisely crafted. This wasn't part of the original monastery construction. "Look at the masonry technique. This predates everything else we've found here by at least 2 centuries. Elena knelt beside him, running her gloved fingers along the ancient stonework. Morrison was right. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, the kind of precision that spoke of tremendous importance, of something worth protecting. The blocks formed what appeared to be the entrance to an underground chamber, sealed with mortar that had hardened to stone over the centuries. "How deep do you think it goes?" Elena asked, already knowing they would need ground-penetrating radar to get a proper assessment. "Only one way to find out," Morrison replied with the excitement of a man who had spent his life chasing mysteries buried in sand. The next 3 weeks were consumed by careful excavation around the sealed entrance. Elena's team worked with brushes and dental picks, removing centuries of accumulated sand and debris grain by grain. They documented everything, photographed every angle, measured every stone. The university administrators back in London were growing impatient with the slow progress, but Elena refused to rush. Whatever lay beneath those stones had waited 1,600 years. It could wait a little longer for them to do things properly. The sealed entrance revealed itself to be more complex than they had initially realized. The limestone blocks weren't just randomly stacked, but formed an intricate locking mechanism, designed to keep something in or perhaps to keep someone out. Ancient symbols were carved into the stone, Coptic script mixed with earlier hieroglyphic elements that suggested the tomb had been repurposed from an even older burial site. Dr. Sarah Chen, the team's specialist in ancient languages, spent days photographing and translating the inscriptions. What she found made Elena's blood run cold, not from fear, but from the implications of what they might discover below. "Elena," Sarah said one evening as they sat in the camp's main tent reviewing the day's findings, "these inscriptions aren't typical burial markings. They're warnings." "What kind of warnings?" Elena asked. Though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer, Sarah pulled out her translation notes, pages covered with careful handwriting and cross-references. The text speaks of something sacred being protected here, something that must remain undisturbed until the proper time. But there's also mention of divine protection, of holy guardians watching over what lies beneath. Elena felt a familiar skepticism rise in her chest. Every ancient tomb came with curses and warnings. It was standard practice, designed to scare away grave robbers and ensure the dead remained undisturbed. Religious significance or not, they were archaeologists. Their job was to uncover the past, not to be frightened away by ancient superstitions. On October 15th, after 24 days of meticulous excavation, Elena's team finally broke through the last seal. The limestone blocks had been moved aside with mechanical precision, revealing a narrow, stone staircase that descended into absolute darkness. The air that rose from the opening was different, older, carrying scents that belonged to another millennium. Elena stood at the entrance with Morrison and Chen, looking down into the black void below. Their powerful LED flashlights penetrated only the first few meters before the darkness swallowed the light completely. The staircase was carved directly into the bedrock, each step worn smooth by whatever feet had walked here centuries ago. "Who goes first?" Morrison asked. Though they all knew it would be Elena, she was the lead archaeologist. The responsibility was hers. Elena adjusted her headlamp and checked her equipment one final time. Radio, camera, measuring tools, sample containers, everything an archaeologist needed to document whatever lay hidden in the depths. "The stairs are probably unstable after all this time. Give me 30 minutes. If you don't hear from me, call the authorities." The descent felt like traveling backward through time. Each step took Elena further from the modern world above and deeper into a past that few living people had ever witnessed. The walls of the staircase were carved with more symbols, more warnings, more promises of divine protection that Elena read with professional interest rather than personal concern. 23 steps down, the staircase opened into a chamber that took Elena's breath away. Her flashlight beams swept across walls covered in pristine frescoes depicting scenes from early Christian history. The preservation was extraordinary, colors still vivid after 16 centuries in the darkness. But it was what stood in the center of the chamber that made Elena forget to breathe. A marble sarcophagus, carved with such incredible detail that it looked more like a work of art than a burial container. But more striking than the craftsmanship was what rested on top of the sealed tomb. A statue, perhaps 3 feet tall, carved from what appeared to be pure white alabaster. Even in the harsh LED light, the figure seemed to glow with an inner radiance that defied explanation. Elena approached slowly, her footsteps echoing in the silence of centuries. As her light illuminated the statue more clearly, she realized what she was looking at. The Virgin Mary, depicted with such lifelike detail that Elena felt as though she were in the presence of a living person rather than carved stone. The statue was unlike anything Elena had ever encountered in her decades of archaeological work. The face was serene, yet somehow alive, carved with such precision that individual eyelashes seemed visible in the beam of her flashlight. The robes flowed naturally, as if frozen mid-movement by some divine sculptor who understood anatomy better than any mortal craftsman should have. Elena circled the sarcophagus slowly, documenting everything with her camera. The statue's hands were positioned in prayer, fingers delicately carved to show the texture of skin, the gentle curve of knuckles, but it was the eyes that unsettled her most. They seemed to follow her movement around the chamber, watching with a compassion that made Elena's scientific detachment falter for the first time in years. She activated her radio, her voice barely steady as she spoke into the device. "Morrison, Chen, you need to come down here. Bring the full documentation kit and the portable lighting array. What we've found changes everything." The response crackled through the static. "On our way down." "Everything secure?" Elena looked around the chamber once more. The frescoes depicted scenes she recognized from early Christian manuscripts, but the artistry was beyond anything she had seen from the 4th century. The preservation was impossible. No organic pigments should have survived this long, especially not with such vibrant colors. More than secure, it's miraculous. She caught herself using that word and felt a flush of embarrassment. Scientists didn't use terms like miraculous. They used words like unprecedented, extraordinary, scientifically significant. But standing alone in that chamber, surrounded by art that shouldn't exist, and facing a statue that seemed more alive than carved stone, Elena found her vocabulary inadequate. When Morrison and Chen descended with the equipment, their reactions mirrored Elena's stunned silence. Chen dropped her notebook when she saw the statue, her normally steady hands trembling as she retrieved it from the ancient floor. Morrison, a man who had seen treasures from every major civilization, simply stood motionless for several minutes before managing to speak. "How is this possible?" Morrison whispered, as if speaking too loudly might disturb whatever presence lingered in the chamber. "The preservation, the craftsmanship, the detail. This shouldn't exist." Chen had recovered enough to begin photographing the wall frescoes, but Elena noticed her movements were different, more reverent than usual. The linguist kept glancing back at the statue, as if seeking permission to continue her work. Elena found herself doing the same thing, though she couldn't explain why. The team spent the next 6 hours documenting everything in the chamber. They photographed every fresco, measured every dimension, took samples of the pigments and stone. But no matter how much scientific data they collected, none of it explained what they were witnessing. The preservation was beyond anything known to archaeology. The artistry surpassed the greatest masters of any era. It was Chen who first noticed the inscription carved into the base of the sarcophagus. "Elena, look at this. The text here. It's different from what we found above." Elena knelt beside the marble tomb, directing her light toward the carefully carved letters. The script was Coptic, but mixed with Latin phrases that suggested a much later addition to the original burial site. "What does it say?" Chen traced the letters with her finger, translating slowly. "Here lies the faithful servant who guarded the sacred gift, protected by divine will until the appointed time when truth shall be revealed to those who seek with pure hearts." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. Those who seek with pure hearts. She had never considered her heart particularly pure. Her motivations were academic, professional, driven by curiosity and career advancement rather than any spiritual longing. Yet here she was, the first person in centuries to witness whatever miracle lay hidden in this chamber. "Should we open it?" Morrison asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer was beyond their authority to decide. Elena looked at the sarcophagus, then at the statue of the Virgin Mary standing sentinel over the sealed tomb. Every protocol she had ever learned said yes, they should open it, document its contents, preserve whatever artifacts lay inside for scientific study. But something deeper, something she didn't want to acknowledge, whispered that they were already trespassing on sacred ground. "Not yet," Elena heard herself saying. "We need to understand more about this place first. The inscriptions, the frescoes, the historical context. We can't just break open a sealed tomb without knowing what we're dealing with." Morrison nodded, though Elena could see the disappointment in his eyes. Chen seemed relieved, as if Elena had made the decision she herself couldn't voice. They continued their documentation work in relative silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what they had discovered. As the hours passed, Elena began to notice something that made her question her own sanity. The temperature in the chamber remained constant despite their body heat and equipment, but the air itself seemed to change. Sometimes it carried the faint scent of roses, though no flowers could possibly exist in this sealed environment. Other times, she caught hints of frankincense, as if invisible censers were burning somewhere in the shadows beyond their lights. Chen noticed it too. "Elena, do you smell that?" Elena had been hoping she was imagining the fragrances, that stress and excitement were playing tricks on her senses. "You smell it too?" "Roses," Chen nodded. "Sometimes other things. Incense, maybe. It doesn't make any scientific sense." Morrison had been examining the frescoes with a magnifying glass, but he turned at their conversation. "I thought I was losing my mind. The air down here, it's different. Like being inside a church during high mass." Elena felt her scientific worldview beginning to crack under the weight of experiences that had no rational explanation. She accounts from other archaeologists. Attribute had spent her career dismissing suching them to overactive imaginations and the psychological effects of working in ancient religious sites. Now she was living those inexplicable moments herself. The statue seemed to watch them work, its carved eyes following their movements with an awareness that stone should never possess. Elena found herself speaking to it silently, explaining what they were doing, asking permission to continue their research. The behavior was so unlike her usual professional demeanor that she felt embarrassed, yet she couldn't stop herself from seeking that silent approval. By evening, when they finally emerged from the tomb to file their initial reports, Elena knew their lives had been fundamentally changed. They had discovered something that challenged not only archaeological understanding, but the very nature of reality itself. The statue was perfect, impossibly preserved, radiating a presence that transcended mere craftsmanship. That night, as Elena sat in her tent typing her preliminary findings, she struggled to find words that would convey the magnitude of their discovery, without sounding like she had lost her scientific objectivity. How could she describe the sense of divine presence that permeated the chamber? How could she explain the impossible preservation, the fragrances that shouldn't exist, the feeling of being watched by eyes carved from stone? She deleted and rewrote the same paragraph dozens of times, each version sounding either too clinical or too mystical. The university administrators expected facts, measurements, historical significance. They would not be interested in her personal spiritual crisis or her growing certainty that they had uncovered something that transcended the boundaries of academic study. Elena finally settled on a deliberately understated report that focused on the archaeological significance while downplaying the inexplicable elements of their find. But as she prepared for sleep, she knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges to her understanding of what was possible in a universe she had thought she completely understood. The following morning brought visitors Elena hadn't expected. Word of their discovery had somehow reached the local Coptic Christian community, despite their attempts at discretion. Father Antonius, an elderly priest from a nearby monastery, arrived at the excavation site before dawn, accompanied by two younger clerics who spoke in hushed tones and kept their eyes downcast. Elena met them at the perimeter of the dig site, still wearing yesterday's dusty work clothes and feeling unprepared for what seemed like an official religious delegation. Father Antonius was a man in his 70s, with a white beard that reached his chest and eyes that held the kind of depth that comes from decades of contemplation. Dr. Martinez, Father Antonius spoke in accented English, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "We have come because of what you have found beneath the sand. Our community has protected the memory of this place for many generations." Elena felt a knot form in her stomach. "How did you know what we found?" "We haven't released any public statements yet." The old priest smiled gently. "Doctor, there are some things that cannot be hidden. When the sacred is disturbed, those who have been waiting feel it in their hearts. We have been the guardians of this secret for 16 centuries." Morrison appeared beside Elena, having heard voices from his tent. The Scotsman looked as confused as Elena felt, but there was also relief in his expression, as if the arrival of religious authorities somehow validated the inexplicable experiences they had encountered in the tomb. "Father," Elena said carefully, "we're archaeologists. We follow scientific protocols and legal procedures. Whatever we've found belongs to the Egyptian Department of Antiquities and the international archaeological community." Father Antonius nodded patiently. "Of course, Dr. Martinez. We do not come to claim ownership of stones and earth. We come because what you have awakened requires understanding that goes beyond what your instruments can measure." Chen joined them, drawn by the conversation. Elena noticed that the linguist immediately showed deference to the priest, bowing her head slightly in a gesture of respect that surprised everyone present. Chen had never displayed any particular religious inclination during their months of working together. "Father," Chen said softly, "the inscriptions in the chamber, they mention appointed times and divine protection. Do you know what they mean?" The elderly priest's eyes brightened with something that might have been joy mixed with profound sorrow. "Child, those words were carved by my predecessors, monks who gave their lives to protect what lies in that sacred space. They knew this day would come, when those seeking truth would break the seals and stand before the miracle." Elena felt her scientific skepticism warring with something deeper, something that had been growing since she first laid eyes on the impossible statue. "What miracle, Father? What exactly do you think we've found down there?" Father Antonius gestured toward the sealed entrance to the tomb, visible in the morning light as a dark rectangle cut into the desert floor. "You have found proof, Dr. Martinez. Proof that faith and science need not be enemies, that the divine works through human hands and hearts in ways your textbooks cannot explain." The priest's companions began unpacking items from canvas bags they carried. Elena watched with growing unease as they produced candles, incense, and what appeared to be ancient manuscripts wrapped in protective cloth. This looked less like a scholarly consultation and more like the preparation for some kind of religious ceremony. "Father," Morrison interjected, "we appreciate your interest in our work, but this is an active archaeological site. We can't allow unauthorized personnel into the excavation area." Father Antonius turned to Morrison with eyes that held no anger, only infinite patience. "Mr. Morrison, I understand your concerns, but consider this. In all your years of digging through the remnants of the past, have you ever encountered anything like what waits in that chamber?" Morrison's silence was answer enough. Elena could see the internal struggle playing out across her colleague's face. The Scotsman was a man of science, trained to trust evidence and measurement, but their discovery had shaken foundations he hadn't even realized he possessed. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Hassan, the Egyptian official who oversaw their excavation permits. Elena had been dreading this moment, knowing that news of their discovery would inevitably reach the authorities. Hassan was a serious man who took his responsibilities seriously and had little patience for irregularities in archaeological procedures. "Dr. Martinez," Hassan called as he approached the group, his expression unreadable. "We need to discuss your recent findings. The ministry has received some interesting reports about your work here." Elena felt trapped between competing authorities, each with their own claims on what lay beneath the desert sand. The Egyptian government had legal jurisdiction over all archaeological discoveries on their soil. The international academic community expected rigorous scientific documentation, and now the local religious community was asserting some kind of spiritual authority over their find. "Dr. Hassan," Elena said, trying to maintain professional composure, "we were planning to file our complete preliminary report today. The discovery is significant, but we're still in the early stages of documentation and analysis." Hassan nodded, but his attention had shifted to Father Antonius and his companions. "Father, I know you by reputation. Your monastery has cooperated with our department on several occasions. What brings you here today?" The elderly priest and the government official spoke together in Arabic, a conversation Elena couldn't follow, but whose tone suggested long familiarity and mutual respect. She caught occasional words that sounded like references to ancient agreements and shared responsibilities. Chen leaned close to Elena and whispered, "They're talking about some kind of covenant between the monastery and the state. Something about protecting sacred sites from inappropriate interference." Elena felt control of the situation slipping away from her. This was supposed to be a straightforward archaeological excavation, the kind she had conducted dozens of times before. Instead, she found herself at the center of competing claims involving religion, politics, and forces she didn't understand. "Dr. Martinez," Hassan said, switching back to English, "Father Antonius has reminded me of certain protocols that apply to discoveries of religious significance. We will need to proceed with additional consultation and oversight." "What kind of oversight?" Elena asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. "The priest will accompany your team into the chamber," Hassan explained. His expertise in early Christian history and his community's oral traditions may provide insights that complement your scientific analysis. Elena wanted to protest, to insist on maintaining the integrity of their archaeological procedures, but she could see the determination in both men's faces. More importantly, she couldn't deny that their scientific approach had failed to explain what they had encountered in the tomb. Father Antonius seemed to sense her internal conflict. "Dr. Martinez, I do not come to interfere with your work or to challenge your expertise. I come to help you understand what you have found, because understanding requires both knowledge and wisdom." The descent into the tomb felt different with Father Antonius present. The elderly priest moved down the ancient stairs with surprising agility, pausing occasionally to touch symbols carved into the walls with reverent familiarity. His companions remained above ground, but Elena could hear them beginning to chant softly in what sounded like ancient Coptic. When they reached the chamber, Father Antonius stopped at the entrance and crossed himself slowly. Elena watched his reaction carefully, looking for signs of surprise or wonder at the impossible preservation and artistry that had stunned her team. Instead, she saw recognition, as if he were greeting an old friend after a long separation. "She has been waiting," the priest whispered, his voice filled with awe that seemed directed not at the craftsmanship, but at something deeper. All these centuries, waiting for hearts ready to receive her message. Elena followed his gaze to the statue of the Virgin Mary. In the portable lighting array they had set up, the alabaster figure seemed even more lifelike than before. The carved robes appeared to move slightly in the artificial illumination, creating shadows that gave the impression of breathing. "Father, what message?" Chin asked, her scientific training apparently forgotten in the presence of something that transcended academic categories. Father Antonius approached the statue slowly, his movements those of someone entering the most sacred space imaginable. He knelt before the carved figure and began to pray in a language Elena didn't recognize, words that seemed to resonate in the stone chamber with unusual clarity. As the priest prayed, Elena became aware of changes in the chamber that her scientific instruments couldn't measure. The temperature remained constant, but warmth seemed to radiate from the statue itself. The air grew thick with the scent of roses and frankincense, fragrances so intense that even Morrison commented on them. Most unsettling of all, Elena found herself fighting the urge to kneel beside the elderly priest. Something in the atmosphere of the chamber, some presence she couldn't name or categorize, was drawing her toward an act of reverence that violated everything she thought she believed about herself. Morrison seemed to be experiencing the same internal struggle. The pragmatic Scotsman kept glancing between his scientific equipment and the praying priest, as if trying to reconcile two incompatible versions of reality. Chen had given up the pretense of professional detachment entirely and stood with her hands clasped in front of her, tears streaming down her face for reasons she couldn't explain. When Father Antonius finally rose from his prayers, his face held a peace that Elena envied despite her skepticism. He turned to face the three archaeologists, and Elena saw in his eyes the absolute certainty of someone who had just received confirmation of everything he had spent his life believing. "Now you begin to understand," the priest said gently. "What you have found here is not merely an artifact to be studied and catalogued. This is a gift. placed here by divine providence for those who would seek truth in the darkest times. Elena found her voice, though it came out weaker than she intended. Father, I'm a scientist. I deal in evidence and proof. What you're talking about sounds like faith, and faith isn't something I know how to measure or document. Father Antonius smiled with genuine compassion. Dr. Martinez, faith and evidence are not enemies. They are different ways of seeing the same truth. Your instruments can tell you the age of the stone and the composition of the pigments, but they cannot tell you why this place has been preserved against all natural law, or why your hearts are moved by something your minds cannot explain. Elena looked around the chamber, seeing it now through different eyes. The impossible preservation, the fragrances that shouldn't exist, the sense of being watched by carved stone. Everything her training told her was scientifically impossible was happening right in front of her. But admitting that would mean acknowledging that her entire worldview was built on incomplete understanding. The priest seemed to read her thoughts. "Child," he said softly, "sometimes the greatest discoveries require us to expand our definition of what is possible. Your instruments measure the physical world with great precision, but there are dimensions of reality that exist beyond measurement." Morrison stepped forward, his usual professional composure cracking. "Father, in 30 years of archaeology, I've never encountered anything like this. The preservation alone defies every law of chemistry and physics I know. How do you explain it?" Father Antonius gestured toward the frescoes that covered the chamber walls. "The monks who sealed this place understood something your modern world has forgotten. They knew that some things transcend the natural order. They prayed for divine protection over this sacred space, and their prayers were answered." Chen had been studying the wall paintings with her magnifying glass, but she turned at the priest's words. "The pigments should have degraded centuries ago. Organic compounds simply don't survive in these conditions. Yet here they are, as vibrant as the day they were painted." Elena felt something fundamental shifting inside her, like tectonic plates moving, deep beneath the surface of her consciousness. She had built her career on the assumption that everything could be explained through scientific analysis, but standing in this chamber, surrounded by impossibilities that her instruments confirmed but couldn't explain, that assumption was crumbling. "Father," she said quietly, "what exactly are you suggesting we found here?" The elderly priest moved closer to the statue, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. "According to our traditions, passed down through 16 centuries of faithful guardians, this statue was carved by a monk who experienced a vision of the Virgin Mary herself. But it is more than carved stone, Dr. Martinez. It is a conduit, a bridge between the physical world and the divine realm." Elena felt her scientific skepticism warring with something deeper, something that had been awakening since the moment she first laid eyes on the impossible preservation in this chamber. "You're saying this statue is somehow supernatural?" "I am saying that the divine works through physical matter in ways your textbooks cannot explain," Father Antonius replied. "This statue was blessed by Mary herself, according to our records. It was hidden here not to keep it from the world, but to preserve it until the appointed time when humanity would need tangible proof of divine presence." Morrison had been taking measurements around the chamber, but his movements were distracted, as if his scientific instruments felt inadequate in this space. "The electromagnetic readings down here are completely anomalous. My equipment keeps registering energy signatures that shouldn't be possible in a sealed stone chamber." Elena looked at the data Morrison was collecting, numbers that made no sense according to any scientific model she knew. The chamber was registering temperature fluctuations that followed no pattern, electromagnetic fields that seemed to pulse in rhythm with something they couldn't identify, and air composition readings that suggested the presence of elements that didn't appear on any periodic table. Elena Martinez emerged from that tomb a different woman than the one who had descended into its depths. The skeptical archaeologist, who had spent decades dismissing what couldn't be measured, now carried with her the knowledge that some mysteries transcend the boundaries of science. The perfect statue of the Virgin Mary, impossibly preserved in that sealed chamber, had shattered more than just academic theories. It had opened a door between two worlds that Elena had spent her life believing were separate. If this story of discovery has touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that miracles still happen in our modern world. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories that challenge what we think we know about faith and science. Write in the comments if you believe some discoveries are meant to transform us rather than simply inform us. May this ancient miracle remind you that truth often waits patiently in the darkness until hearts are ready to receive it.